So going back to the initial little project that I was working on here, um, this here, these little Gameboy amplifier boards, just want to show just how intricate these are to actually make. Just for size comparison, that's the size of the little circuit board that the main components sit on, and that sits in situ of the original Game Boy amplifier. Let me just see if I've got one behind me a second. So I've just managed to find and dig out an original Game Boy amplifier chip. Let me just set that one there. So that way around. So that's an original amplifier chip from, I think that's from the Game Boy Pocket, but it's the same amplifier used in the Game Boy Pocket, the Game Boy Color. But inherently, these run from 3 volt or whatever supply voltage provided by the batteries. And other than the filters on the board, there's no other filters going on the main supply lines from the battery. So you get a lot of noise coming from the battery and from surrounding components when you're using these, whereas this has actually got a 5 volt supply to the amplifier, but I'm not sure what it's used for in the amp. I haven't really gone into that level of detail, but as opposed to using the 3 volt input from the batteries, or whatever the batteries are, this actually uses the 5 volt supply. So before I start doing anything else, I just want to give a bit of an idea of how small this little amplifier board is. So that's my little finger, my little fingernail. That's how big it is compared to that. That's the end of a USB stick, micro SD card, for example. And then just to give you an idea of the scale of the components, I'll just pick up a resistor here. That's a resistor. So these are very small. It's like the size of a grain of sand. That is tiny. So because these are so small, and I do so few of these, it's not really worth a huge amount of expenditure on things like solder masks and such like. So I do everything by hand. So it's just preference, I guess. But I have in the past just tried to solder each component individually by hand with a soldering iron, and it's painstaking to say the least. So the way I'm going to do it today is I'm going to apply a little bit of flux to the board, and then with some fresh solder on a hot tip, just going to tin the board first, and then what I'll then do is clean it up, add in the components bit by bit, and then use a hot plate just to reflow everything. So I'll get started with that. So I've zoomed right the way in now, and let me just adjust that just slightly. Dark thing is the camera is still about, I don't know, 9-10 inches away from the thing, from the little circuit board here, but it's a microscope. So it's not designed to be used as a general streaming webcam. So, but here we go. So that's just the little circuit board there. I'm just going to come in and put a little teeny weeny dabble. This is very inappropriate sized syringe. It was a mechanics tube of solder flux, but owing to a kerfuffle, I accidentally ended up putting into a different. I decanted the flux into a different syringe and to make it easier to use, and ended up in the wrong syringe, which makes it even more worse to use because I can't put a tip on the end of it. I can't get tips that fit on the end of it. So I'm gonna apply a little bit of flux on the end of that there, solder on the end of that there. I'm just gonna come along and just very carefully hold it in place there, and just tin these pads very, very carefully. Just do a little bit of tinning. Just try and leave enough. Just dabble it on there, just try and leave enough solder on each pad to be able to reflow afterwards. There we go. That's lovely. Tip a bit of a quick clean, and we're golden there. I'll just dig out my little hot plate. I'll get that set up. It's a bit manky, so I'll have to adjust the camera, but it works quite well. It works quite well. Like I say, it's just a little bit manky. So just in the time being, more or less warming up, grab a little bit of isopropyl alcohol and a little wipe. I mean, to be fair, I've mostly used the mechanic stuff because it's accessible. So once again, these are little mechanic sponges, so I'll just put a little bit of isopropyl on that. Just give it a wipe down, give it a bit of a clean off, and then come back in with my two pairs of tweezers out really. Come back in with a little bit of cloth and just give that a wipe down, just like that. And there we go. So now that that's all cleaned up, I'll come back again now with another little dabble of flux. Don't need a lot. This stuff's really, really runny. See if I can get a pair of tweezers out as well. There we go. That's better. Just gonna come along and just move this flux around just a little bit. Now just hold everything in place when it comes to soldering. And I'll just use the cloth just to wipe the tip off. Lovely jubbly. Right, so I've just moved a handful of these components over. I'm just going to flip this board around the other way, like so. And then you can just see there what it is I'm looking at. So these are all the components that go on the board. So these are capacitors for the input and output, and sort of a little bit of voltage control as well. And then these are all the little resistors as well. They're all the same value. There's no sense, given what this is, going massively complicated with that. The chip itself is Texas Instruments LM4853 or something along those lines, if memory serves me right. It's the design itself was inspired by the bucket mouse Gameboy Color. I hate these things; it's just so annoying. They get flipped upside down. So I ended up building or designing this board to replace the amplifier chips directly, and so it just makes it sound a lot better. You get a bit more volume out of it, and it also eliminates a lot of the hissing and popping and humming that you get from the standard amplifier chip as well. So that's going to pop that on there, and then the two, I actually can't remember these values, the two lighter capacitors just go on there like so. Trying to do this by eye, looking at my PC screen. And then the two darker ones go there. Probably be easier if I swapped the tweezers over. There we go, there's one. I mean, if these were a massive hit, then I'd probably go mass produce, but there's no point really. This is just a little bit of fun for me. A little bit of fun for me. And what I might just do to make my life just a little bit easier. Unfortunately, because this flux is so thin, it doesn't really hold the components all that well. And I'm trying to eyeball this whilst looking at the screen camera, at the screen, rather than looking at what I'm doing. My hands and fingers don't quite marry up to where it's like performing surgery with a robot, but the robot is my own fingers. I'm not actually looking at the screen. There we go. Hell, I make this look so easy. It really, really isn't. Especially when I'm actually not looking at what I'm doing, I'm looking at the screen instead. And just working it by feel. So these resistors are all the same. They just do like enable and then input resistance, feedback resistance, that sort of thing. And that's pretty much that. So I'm just going to pause it there, bring in the hot pad, the heat plate, and see what happens from there. So I'm going to apologise, this hot heat pad is absolutely minging. I was doing some work with it the other day, and yeah, it didn't clean off very well. So I'm just going to bring the little circuit board over to here, and within seconds this should actually start to melt down. And there we go. And of course, nothing goes where you want it to go. Just going to move that into there. Once they pick up, they just pull themselves into place eventually. But here we go. This one's always a bit of a pain. Got a bit of mine of its own. There we go. But yeah, once everything's in, you give it a bit of a tickle there, like that will sort itself out. Ah, fantastic. And I'll just whip that off there. And there we go. That is one completed amplifier for a Gameboy Color. Very happy with that. So last but not least, little board looking pretty good. I did end up swapping one of the capacitors over, just off camera, just this little one here. For some reason, I had a rogue capacitor just sat on my desk. So I'm just going to get a little bit of isopropyl just on the end of a toothbrush. That's a toothbrush in comparison to the size of this, by the way. So it's positively tiny. Just try and clear off some of the mess and flux. And just fling it off the side of the screen. Here we go. Trouble with using 100% isopropyl, that when it evaporates, you end up with a bit of water, because as the isopropyl evaporates, it cools, and technically then that draws in water and forms moisture and things. You never leave marks everywhere, so you're best off trying to clear that up as quickly as you can. I really probably ought to invest in some 70% isopropyl, but there we go, never mind, it works. And so yeah, that's the Gameboy amplifier on a flexible circuit board. I'm very happy with that. And just a handful more to make. Hello.